what I think has made Ohio State so explosive is their propensity not to consistently beat the hell out of you up front and run the ball down your throat, but the propensity for them to turn around and hand it off and have guys like Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson who can go at any point in time, right? They can
Right.
gash you with a 40-yarder, and that is so deflating. And I think it really I think that really feeds the rest of the offense because they know it's coming. And if, as long as they stick to it, it also helps out their strengths as a passing football team and really a vertical passing team. It really helps their strengths, right? Because you know you can sit there and turn around and hand it off. So but that's the matchup, man. I think Michigan really needs to come in and try to make Ohio State one-dimensional, really rely on CJ Stroud, and then, see if they can weather that storm appropriately and give their offense some short fields and take advantage of it.
Yeah, it's when I flip on the tape of Michigan defensively, the first thing that pops out to me is fundamentals, and it is like clinic tape. I mean, I
Yep.
watch the big guys up front. They all step the right direction when they're supposed to. They fire their hands. They play with great leverage. They've got great ankle flexion, knee bend. Their hips are pretty fluid for big guys. They stay square at the point of attack. Like, I watch these fucking guys yoke somebody up, fucking literally lock them out,
Yeah.
rip off, and they're square the whole time so they can make a play. I'm like, holy moly, it's a well-coached unit. And so I think that's their biggest separator is like when you compare the talent that they have with the fundamentals that they play with, it's a really difficult defense to deal with. And I think that those guys are also pretty good communicators. And it's a new defensive coordinator, but it's the same system that they were in before. And you can tell just by the way that they communicate out there on the football field. So I'm really intrigued by what they'll be able to do. I think that their weakness is in their secondary. And we know what Ohio State has out there at wide receiver. Question is for this offensive line, and Ohio State's offensive line has done a good job. Let me pull up my stats here just to put some context about what I'm getting ready to say here in protecting CJ Stroud. And he's a crafty veteran quarterback, but Ohio State has allowed 7 sacks on the season. It's the least in the Big Ten Conference. Like, this is an offense that has done a really good job protecting a great quarterback. And they're going to need to do it. But again, they have not faced a defensive line with the elite talent that Michigan has. So certainly going to be a big challenge. We'll flip it over to Ohio State's offense. And we've kind of touched on it when talking about Michigan, but they're in a similar situation with the injury bug in the backfield where Mayan Williams did not play a week ago. Travion Henderson gave it a try and he looked awful. I don't know what his ability to go is going to be. Bright spot there, freshman Dallin Hayden. I mean, he was ripping off, 5.4 a carry against Maryland. Looked like he got a lot of juice. He was running between the tackles without fear. Certainly something that Buckeye fans were happy to see. But it's been, and this is where I'm going to hit you with the stat that's going to probably shock you because it's a little bit of a narrative buster. It's felt extremely inconsistent for Ohio State on the ground. Like, it's up and down performances. You go through the stats, and I had to double take on this multiple times. They are leading the Big Ten in yards per carry. They have the most yards per carry in the Big Ten, better than Michigan, better than Minnesota, better than Penn State with their new backfield, and those guys are running like crazy. Like, this is an offense that it doesn't always feel good, but they have been able to get the yardage on the ground. They're not going to run as much as some of these other teams, but when they do, it's been pretty effective for them.
How explosive has that been? If that makes sense, like how much of those yards per carry, to your point, I mean, they're not turning around and handing it off 40 times a game very regularly, but like I said, it just feels like, to your point, it feels like it's kind of like a slow grind, but it's a slow grind, like for a really big reward at the end. I feel like they always have 3 or 4 big gashes a game.
They do. They have 10 runs on the season of 30 or more. They've got 8 runs on the season of 40 or more, and that leads the conference. So, to your point, they've got some of those big explosive plays. But even when you look at the 10 or more, they're third in the conference. It's Michigan at number 1, and then Minnesota 2, and then they're tied right there with Illinois. So it's like, as much as it has felt like this team has struggled to run the football, they've been pretty effective when when the block's set up and the running backs actually run their damn track, like it's been effective
Mm-hmm.
getting the yards.
Yeah, and that's going to be, like I said, I think that's going to be really important for this team. I think Michigan needs to try to eliminate that aspect, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, you're not going to take away their weapons outside for four
Can't do
quarters.
it.
It's not going to happen. Impossible. Can't do it. And to your point, with if you're going to pick out a weak link in this Michigan team, it's the defensive backfield, right? Not going to do it. But if you can at least eliminate the threat of them turning around, handing it off, and taking pressure off of CJ Stroud, if you, to your point, like playing a perfect game at quarterback for four quarters is really freaking hard to do. And if you can increase your chances of him making a mistake or putting them behind the sticks or getting them off schedule by eliminating something that has been a very foundational piece of their offense this year, it could be interesting. I'm not saying it's going to be a game breaker and the key to the game or anything like that, but I think if I'm going to have to sit here and dissect this, right? Because at the end of the day, I look at this as just, this is, to your point, it's a 2 versus 3 matchup. This is freaking Ali versus Frazier. Like it's
Absolutely.
When you're looking at it, like sit back, grab a cold one and enjoy the shit out of this, because it's going to be great old school, old like football. If you're a fucking football nerd, like this is what you want to sit down and watch.
100%.
But if I'm going to have to sit here and like, split hairs about what could be a factor and what couldn't, like to me that's what it could be, right? Like
no doubt.
Or CJ Stroud to maybe make a mistake that he hasn't made all year, or two. And see if it plays into your favor, right?
Yeah, it's that's going to be one of the critical battles to me, is like, I think for Ohio State's run game inconsistencies, a lot of it to me has fallen on guys wanting to freelance a little bit once they get the ball in their hands. Like Trevion Henderson's a guy who operates extremely well in space, and so he is quick to void an interior gap if he feels like he can capture an edge. Mayan Williams, for all that he does well, he doesn't have the home run ability. He had a long one against Rutgers, is really impressive, but like you're not going to get that with him consistently. So I think it's about a rhythm. Here's a take that I don't think a lot of people have about Ohio State's wide receiver group. Marvin Harrison Jr., my personal opinion, best wide receiver in the country. Just some of the things that he does, and he's active without the football. But I look at Emeka Ibuka. He is a good wide receiver. Sometimes he gets a little bit lost in the shuffle. I look at Julian Fleming, and his inconsistencies in catching the football have been an issue these last few weeks. Is there a potential route for Michigan to say that we are going to lean our coverage to Marv the whole game? And if Ohio State isn't going to use him as a guy that they're going to pick up off the line of scrimmage and move around in motion to try to get press off of him and try to get him free in coverage, I'm just going, we're doubling, and then the other guy's got to go out there and make the play.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a play, but then, just as well as I do, if you're going to dedicate an extra hat to another guy outside, then that's going to lighten the box on the interior. And if Ohio State can,
it's a risk that you might take, though. I mean, if Marv comes out early and he starts heating up.
I agree with you, but then that's the problem with Ohio State, right? There's a few offenses I think in the country that present the similar issues, and yeah, I mean, I think you could say like between Ibuka and Fleming in their inconsistencies, but I still think that a vast majority of programs across the country would kill to have either of those guys
100%.
lining up for them, right? So at the same token, when you're comparing them to the room that they're in and the standard that they're being held to, maybe not quite up to par yet, but I think that they're all going to develop. And it's similar. I mean, I think you could say a similar thing about Jackson Smith and Jigba last year, right? Sitting behind Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Like, didn't really hear much about him, and then all of a sudden, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson decide to shut it down for the Rose Bowl, and the kid goes off. He had a couple big games in there, but even these guys that we're talking about had some big games this year, right? Or bigger games, right? Then all of a sudden against the Rose Bowl, against a really good, tough Utah team, he goes off for 350 and freaking like 3 or 4 touchdowns. You're like, holy shit, right? So right. I just feel like that Ohio State has the guys and the potential to do that at any point in time. And like I'm saying, if you dedicate an extra hat to any one of these individuals, you're creating a mismatch somewhere else within their scheme, whether it be the run game, whether it be somebody else outside. And there's very few offenses in the country that I think can present that issue for a
I
defense. So
know
it's almost
it's
like
so
pick your
hard.
poison, right? It's like
It
pick your poison
is,
as a defensive guy. And
but I mean, you got to pick it though, right?
100%.
Like
And that's
that's
what I'm
the
saying. It's like
conundrum.
pick
Yeah,
it, stick to it, and stick to your
yeah,
guns. And that's why I was saying
yeah.
I think if Michigan can come in and say, fuck it, we're gonna eliminate the run game and then deal with anything else after that, do that. Right. That's my approach, at least initially. Right. Force Ohio State to go force Ryan Day to go back to his pass happy self, because that's what got their ass beat a couple times last year. Like,
Yeah, you. I mean, you're spot on with that. That is the psychology of the game. I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah.
That would be a really interesting point there. We got to touch on the Ohio State defense. We'll hit a couple of topical items in this game, get a prediction, and then we'll have a little bit of fun here at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But this defense, I mentioned it earlier, it's night and day better than it was a year ago. Want to
Yep.
put some stats to that just to give you a little bit of context about what they're doing, but scoring defense, they're top 10 in the country at number 10, giving up
Mm-hmm.
16 points a game, 17 about. Rushing defense in yards per carry, they are the number 8 team in the country, tied with Alabama. Teams ahead of them, Michigan at number 2, Wisconsin, Iowa, teams that we know dedicate to stop the run.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to the pass defense, and this is one of the questions that I've had about them, where they're at. Total pass defense, they're 11th in the country, giving up $175 a game. I like to flip it to yards per attempt because I think that gives you a little bit more of a clear picture. They're number 23, so a little bit of a drop off there. But night and day, better than they were a year ago.